Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished gathering, may the blessings of God be upon you all. First of all, I would like to express my deep gratitude to the Arab Center for holding this forum, which has become an annual event and an occasion for us academics, politicians, experts to discuss very important issues. So I'd like to thank them and wish them success, and we hope that in many years to come celebrate the 50th annual forum. The other thing which I think it's incumbent upon me as a Kuwaiti citizen today, George Bush Sr. has died, and may God rest his soul. If it wasn't for him, maybe we Kuwaitis and the Gulf people would be in a different situation altogether today. And the other thing is, I've heard the previous session, and a lot of mention has been made of the U.S. Gulf relations. They talked about the patron-client relationship. I want to change this concept out of my humble knowledge of American foreign policy. I think we reached a stage which is, I would rather call, master-slave relationship, especially when the head of a state says, if it wasn't for us, you wouldn't survive for 2 weeks, without even a single politician or a statement coming out of the Gulf to counter this claim. If such a claim was made against another country or countries, then a lot of interest would have been generated. And there are also 7 sessions devoted to the United States and 7 to the Gulf countries. I think I say this to the organizers. I think there are 5 major countries in the world, not just United States. Maybe we should have a session devoted to relations with Russia, with France, with China, with the UK. We do not want to be Americanized fully, or neither do we want to ignore the American role. We should strike some sort of a balance. I do not want to take too much of your time. We have 3 panelists with us. I want to give them the time they deserve. To my left is Dr. Anthony Cordesman. He needs no introductions. Everybody knows him and follows his writings. He will be talking about the new patterns of Gulf-U.S. relations and the crises in the Middle East. Dr. Cordesman is well known, his books, his articles. In fact, they are like an encyclopedia, not just...
Again, to this symposium, call it, and we're looking forward to hear what you have on Gulf-U.S. relationship. I'll give you 15 minutes, although I know 15 minutes is a peanut for you, but nonetheless, it's 15 minutes for each and everyone. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. I do have some good news to begin with. Good. Every other part of the world where we have alliances is just as unhappy with us as you are. If we go to NATO, and I've been there for meetings, or you go to Japan or Korea or to ASEAN or Australia, Don't worry, because they are just as doubtful, uncertain, caught up in the president's tweets, and just generally uncertain. The other thing is alliances are always extremely difficult, and the rhetoric of alliances never comes close to the reality. The differences between partners are always serious. They're always a source of tension. And this is something that it is far too easy to forget. But I want to focus almost exclusively on the balance between the United States, its Gulf partners, and Iran, and the threat posed by terrorism and asymmetric warfare, because I think this is the area where people often have the least understanding. And all of the other issues are ones we've been discussing more or less for decades. So let me begin, and let me be very blunt. Every time I hear the word Arab tied to an alliance, I don't think of it as a language or a culture or a region. I think of it as an acronym. And I think of it as standing for dysfunctional and deeply divided. And the Gulf Cooperation Council is no different. From its founding in the early 80s to the period where the boycott began, it was never an effective, coordinated military alliance. There was almost no progress toward interoperability, toward standardization, toward common military institutions, toward integrated intelligence. There was no focus on key military missions or capabilities. It was a matter of countries appearing, having the rhetoric of unity, and pursuing individual national defense policies and budgets, often focused more on what people call the glitter factor than meaningful military capability. So you had to buy the best aircraft, regardless of whether you needed them. You had to have different toys from everyone else. And you focused on maximizing weapon systems rather than sustained, effective combat capability. Throughout that, I think to some extent, particularly the U.S. commands, CENTCOM, Fifth Fleet, AFCENT, did a reasonably good job of trying to work towards the broader goal of some kind of collective Gulf deterrent or defense. I can't say over the years we did as well in the Department of Defense or in state or in the NSC. But the fact was there often were very few opportunities. The key missions here to some extent are air capability and air deterrence, which is a mixture of air defense and air strike capability. But the other missions increasingly are missile defense, and they are the defense of the Gulf. And let me just say one thing. Please come away from this meeting forgetting about the Strait of Hormuz. That has nothing to do with Iranian tactics, strategy, and deployments. They operate and disperse throughout the entire northern Gulf. They practice operations from Kuwait to the Straits. They practice operations in the Gulf of Oman, or you can say the Indian Ocean. And it is a diverse mixture of asymmetric naval, missile, and air capabilities. Exactly one Gulf state has missile, or rather mine warfare capabilities. No Gulf state has bought a Navy designed to deal with the actual asymmetric threat that is the threat posed by Iran. When you look at that, you see basically that you are responding to air and to buying lots of heavy equipment, but not to the missions you really need. The same is true of missile defense, which is the area where Iran has put the most resources into actually developing its forces. And where, to put it simply, that is one thing nobody on the outside can do for you. Missile defense is extremely complex, requires almost instant reaction, and it requires defense in depth, which can only be provided by a common architecture. And basically you have a few countries, and this is one of them, that has thought of buying the missile systems, but you have no meaningful effort to develop an integrated infrastructure. You don't even have integrated naval surveillance systems in the GCC or any effective integrated air defense, to the point where Saudi Arabia doesn't even provide a full air net to a close ally like Bahrain. Now, these are realities, and we have to cope with them and live with them, for good or evil. I think there are many areas of very real military progress, but it's not the time to get into them, except in the areas I already have. Now, you are fighting, or you are essentially deterring or containing a military museum. I served in Iran during the early 70s, and the aircraft that you see that dominate the Iranian Air Force were being purchased back then. They've done a reasonable job of trying to modify. But the fact is, if you don't actually produce and design the aircraft, there are very serious limits to the ability to upgrade it. They do have some Su-24s and MiG-29s, but they're early export versions of the Russian aircraft. They have critical limits on the radars. I won't go through the whole litany, but here is a country that has no real amphibious capability. Here is a country that does not have modern capital ships. Here is a country whose actual deployed surface-to-air missiles go back to the Vietnam era. And we did a pretty good job of containing Vietnamese surface-to-air missiles several decades ago. You are not directly threatened by a hegemon when they have weapon systems that age in dog years. And that is the critical thing to remember about most of Iran's capabilities. What are the differences? There are three important ones. Purchasing the S-400 will change the air defense capabilities and give them early missile defense capabilities in very real ways. That is, to some extent, a potential game changer. Planned asymmetric forces in the Gulf, and they are very difficult to cope with, and they have absolutely nothing to do with aircraft carriers or capital ships. Now, high explosive fast patrol boats, a very wide range of steadily improving anti-ship missiles. These are all key capabilities that are changing with time, and they have shown they can exploit divisions and weaknesses in the Arab world very well with the Al-Quds force and their train, assist, and armament missions. Now let me say here that I do not see this as a sign of Iranian aggressiveness. If you walk down the street with a sign on your back saying, you can't really blame somebody for doing it. If as an Arab group of nations, you are this divided and self-destructive, you invite Iran to exploit you. And yes, it is very ill-mannered to point that out. But it surely must be apparent that this is not some clever Iranian plot. Now, I will not for a moment attempt to defend our president's behavior and tweets. I will say in defense of them that if you actually read the official documents, the National Defense Strategy or the National Security Strategy, and look up America first, it is filled with references to strategic partners and protecting our allies. If you look at the mission, it is as focused on Iran and on counterterrorism as any other mission in there. It is occasionally useful to read what we say rather than what newspapers say we say. There is occasionally a gap. But we have made plenty of mistakes, and I'm not going to take you through the invasion of Iraq or what's happened since 2014 or in Syria. Gary gave a good introduction. I think that there are serious problems there. What I would also say, however, is that we have developed capabilities in fighting in this region we never had before. That our capabilities to target, to use airstrikes, to use victim strikes, to conduct train and assist, to conduct naval operations that are as tailored as we can to deal with the asymmetric threat in Iraq are as good as they can be. I would also say that we have had very good joint exercises with individual Gulf forces. But the reality is this: every exercise is essentially one where the U.S. has to operate bilaterally with individual Gulf country forces. There is no GCC to cooperate or work with. And the quality of those exercises is only as good as the actual contribution. And there are some cases where navies basically, if you don't leave port, we can't exercise with you. If you don't develop the right naval forces for mine warfare or to deal with the Iranian force, we can't be effective either. Those have been serious problems. And I've talked about the naval asymmetry and missile defense. Let me raise a key point here. Iran has lied rather well about improving the precision strike capability of its missile force. It has done some very clever things. It has photoshopped the actual impact of its missiles. It has photoshopped simultaneous launches that never occurred. It has actually fired missiles and then superimposed a diagram of an air base over the craters to show how accurate it is. When you're being lied to well, you should applaud. I mean, it actually does deserve a fair amount of praise. So does exaggerating weapon systems capabilities. But they will get there, and they have some early precision strike systems. If they get that, like the air defense and missile defense, it could, in many ways, change the balance. It certainly would make it more difficult for you with your generation of aircraft. At some point, we get down to stealth, advanced countermeasures, the need for you to have cruise missiles, and fundamental changes in the force mix, not the ones any country is buying. One exercise after this meeting, look at the arms purchase your country is making and try to figure out why. It is not we asked you to do this. We certainly don't reject the buy, but do we or Europe really need, in mission terms, to have you buy the aircraft you're buying? Well, that's a different issue. Where are we on this?
You are, your time, the time is over, but I'll give you 2 more minutes. Go ahead.
Let me just very closely make 2 quick points. We do not need a farce by way of counterterrorism and counterinsurgency capabilities. We need real structured organization and actual coordination, not more buildings, more screens, and more displays. You need to be ready for counterinsurgency. Those are capabilities you're not developing. In terms of arms strength, let me close with this point. Really? Saudi Arabia is spending over 10% of its GDP on defense at a time when it seriously needs economic development and modernization. This country won't declare a meaningful defense budget, and there's no transparency. UAE won't declare a meaningful defense budget and provide any transparency. Oman claims to be spending more than 10%, but none of us can figure out where the money goes. Iraq is definitely spending more than 10%, and Iraq is effectively bankrupt, as the World Bank shows. Out of those purchases, how many actually relate to the mission priorities that you really do have? How many would help us help you with the capabilities you actually need? And above all, why would you buy anything like those numbers if you actually had a meaningful, integrated, interoperable force structure? You're spending, even by the worst case estimate I can make, the GCC alone spends more than 5 times as much as Iran does on defense. It spends more than 15 times more on arms imports, and you can import the most modern Western arms available. And they are stuck generally with third-rate or civilian or smuggled arms shipments. That disparity alone should be one of the key subjects of every think tank here. Because, quite honestly, in my trade of strategic and military analysis, if you don't look at these numbers, and if you want the arms transfers, we just updated it and put it on the CSIS website. You can start from there, don't finish. If you're not doing net assessments, if you're not honestly assessing your defense budgets, a whole group of political slogans, rhetoric, and theories about security are probably going to be something that serves no particular purpose. If you don't translate policy into facts on the ground, there's no point in the policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cordesman. Your presentation, as always, serious, genuine, but scary. So, thanks for thought-provoking presentation.
Now I give the floor to our colleague, Dr. Abdullah AlShayji, Professor of Political Science in the University of Kuwait and researcher. And he does not like to be on the media. His problem. So thank you, Abu Khalifa. He will be speaking about the absence of confidence or trust, the crisis of trust in Gulf-U.S. relations in light of regional challenges. And last week he gave us a presentation about his last visit to Washington. You have 15.
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
In the name of God, most merciful, most compassionate. Assalamu alaikum, good morning. I'm happy to be in this forum for the 4th time, which is about Gulf and in this Arab Center. Thank them for the invitation and thank them for this opportunity to meet my colleagues in the USA and the Gulf. It's painful not to see researchers from Saudi Arabia, the Emirates and Bahrain. This is something painful. In fact, today I will be speaking about this lack of trust or crisis of trust in the GCC US relations, something that was referred to by the other speakers also this morning and also likely by Mr. Cordesman. All this is not new, but what's new is that we are getting weaker and we are being more attached and focused on outsourcing of security, our security. Nevertheless, even after the liberation of Kuwait and one of the leaders of this liberation who died today, the George Bush Sr., nevertheless, so we still depend almost totally on outsourcing of our national security in the region, because the main reason is that there's this lack of trust, neither trust in our armed forces nor in our region military cooperation. And this is this regional cooperation is really suffering from this, since the occupation of Kuwait, and now suffering from the internal crisis between the GCC countries and the bandwagoning, and to the extent that when this crisis in the Gulf began, even Qatar did not count on its American ally, although there was this biggest the biggest base here in Udeid in Qatar, which Trump was unaware of, by the way, and so Qatar had to resort to the Turkish forces and reactivate their agreement, while as there is the biggest military base here in Qatar. The U.S. CENTCOM in Udeid Air Base, which is used by the USA to operate all their operations in the Middle East and the region. All these are run from here, from Qatar. Nevertheless, Qatar asked for help from Turkey, and this is in fact a message to all other Gulf countries that those who should not count on the help of USA. And what Dr. Cordesman said, although he spoke very critically, but in fact has a lot of truth in it. We are self-destruct. The Gulf crisis had exposed many weak points, and now nobody trusts the GCC. And even the GCC countries come back, things will not go back to normal and to the old, to the past. That's why I wrote a book lately about the crises of the GCC countries, and this is increasing the security dilemma. As Dr. Marwan said, we are junior partners to the United States, which is the only superpower left in the world. When you are a junior partner to the strongest country in the world, or the very big partner that has interest not on the Middle East, so you definitely feel that you are satellite. That's when the alliance theory, Blitzkrieg speaks about the security dilemma, which we suffer from also. And this security dilemma is when you are weak and counting on this asymmetric relationship, although there are mutual benefits, but the relation is asymmetric. This makes you that you always exaggerate two things: one, the entrapment and the abandonment. You feel that you have to follow and you cannot convince the other. Obama decided whatever he wants. He decided to have this deal with the USA. We didn't listen to us. And I said there should be +5+1+1, because the GCC countries are those the most exposed to any Iranian threat. Nevertheless, I even was in a conference in the National Council in 2015 in Washington, and one of the officials of GCC, I was calling for the GCC that GCC took part in the negotiations. Now one is talking about a new deal with Iran. Why don't you participate in it, the GCC countries? So we have one person from GCC, Abdullah, said we don't want to be part of the GCC. I was defending that we should be part of this, and Abdullah is the assistant of the Secretary General said we don't want to be part of GCC. So we don't have this threat perception. We don't have a good perception for the future, and this of course increases the problems of exaggeration and our attachment to the West, and to exaggerate the entrapment with the USA, and we cannot change our calculations and saying that, thinking that they are floating against us when Obama and Iran struck the deal. We felt as we were jilted, and this is because we did not create our own military capabilities that would at least decrease your complete dependence on external forces. And then if I want to discuss the trust crisis between GCC countries and the two administration of Trump and Obama, even before lifting the sanctions from Iran and defreezing their frozen assets at the time of Obama, and this would be quick for pro, because you are asymptotic. You cannot have this quick for pro. No, you cannot. There are interests that are being served, but not on two tracks. But as you are a junior partner, even if you ask for something, they will not be given. Nevertheless, you are accused that you are a free rider. And this is the funny thing. I know the Gulf countries do not answer or respond to what Obama said, that they are the free riders. And also, this issue was also in a very insolent way was repeated by Trump, saying that we are free riders, we are not paying enough, and the tone by which he spoke was a very provocative one, and that's not should not be used by a president of USA. But USA does not even consider they have partners. No, they all our satellites we deserve to be partners or even allies, but USA does not look us on like this. All the American administration did not create a strategic relationship with us, and now USA is the first producing country of oil. So the GCC countries' importance and the oil of the Gulf is, including the Iranian, Iraqi, the importance of that is regressing, and now they are not even exporting in natural gas, so they'll be competing even with Qatar. So when Trump wants us to donate money, and Saudi Arabia gave $100 million for Syria because Trump asked her that, what Cordesman called that toys. In fact, it's only a short values, no shared strategic approach. The relationship did not develop to an advanced level, as is the case with Japan, Korea. My question is, why doesn't USA tell to the GCC, you are under our nuclear strategic umbrella? Why it doesn't say that? If they don't want us to develop our own nuclear weapons, you allowed North Korea, South Korea, and Japan, you banned them from developing their nuclear power, so they put them under your nuclear power. So Obama should be thanked, despite his weakness and allowing Iran to control 4 Arab capitals as a reward for having signed the nuclear deal. At the time, he was obsessed to achieve this nuclear deal for enterprise, because he didn't want that under his watch Iran became a nuclear power. So for that he allowed Iran to control the whole region in an asymmetrical war and forces. So Hillary Clinton, when she killed GCC, she created what's called the Us Gcc Strategic Dialogue. This is the first time that US dealt with us as a as a group, not as an individual countries, and this is good. And then it developed from ministers of foreign affairs to minister of foreign affairs and defense, and this is also good from that. And then this was developed after the first summit to be held in 2015, the first American U.S. summit in Camp David that was institutionalized relations in 2015. It was in Camp David, and then 16 Obama in Riyadh. 2017 first visit by Mr. Trump, and then now I think it would or would not be held because of the killing of Khashoggi and the Yemen war, and maybe it is planned for January, this summit, but maybe it will not be held. And the other point is that the real crisis began when we saw that the Obama administration, and secretly, they don't trust us, began American negotiations in secrecy, but we were not told, the Gulf leaders were not told that, and that was in Oman, and good for Oman. They have very good intelligence service. None of the GCC countries' intelligence service could discover this secret negotiations in Oman. Then we only know what it became public, and there were the Geneva negotiations, and we were displeased because did not include the other activities of Iran. The malign activities were not included in this Iran deal, and nor the missile program. So that's this lack of trust individually or collectively in the Obama administration, and this led later on to Mr. Trump that he took a very fluctuating position. In fact, in the beginning, he took the side of the Saudis and the Emirates, but then changed his position when the deep state intervened. We have the air base in Qatar. We are a major power, and we should be able to prove our leadership and support the Kuwaiti mediation to reach an agreement. So this increased, in fact, the concerns and fears that the United States one cannot count on their position, especially when Trump began to attack by different tweets and statements and asking Saudis. Trump even used Saudi bashing. He spared no one, neither the European Union, nor the NATO, nor Japan, nor Britain, nor South Korea. But as far as we're concerned, he is the Tip O'Neill, the former Speaker of the House, said all politics in America are local. So Trump, in a very bad and insulting way, attacked Saudi Arabia to make some political and gains in the midterm elections. In 5 out of the 53 meetings that he had to support the Republican candidates. He used attacking Saudi Arabia and bashing to draw attention. He said, "I'm defending you. Why should you pay $3? You should pay $3 for a gun, and you should pay less." And now he said that Saudi Arabia is decrease the prices, and they should do more. So he speaks to Saudi Arabia as if he's giving orders. Usually there are some etiquette, there are diplomacy that things are not said in public. No, he doesn't care. He speaks publicly, and he considers as if we are ATM cars or gas stations or ATM machines. This increases this complex, but everyone now is waiting to trump out Iran, especially Iran, and even the allies of USA, including us. We don't trust this guy. He has no strategic approach. Your time is over, sir. There are two positions. In the beginning, there was reluctancy and taking a position against Qatar in the beginning of the crisis of the Gulf. So there's also another important point about that in USA right now, the analysis is that if we read Richard Hart's latest book, War in Disorder, and if you read this book, which has just been published, The Empty Throne by Edith Degler, and in October 2018, I advise you to read this book. This has pinpoints in a very dangerous way where America is heading and how the allies of US should deal with it, and not trust USA but develop their own capabilities. This, in fact, this is the Ivo Dadler, the strategic expert. He was the American representative in NATO. He said the American diplomacy is in shambles, but beneath the daily chaos is an erosion of the first world order. Now America has abdicated. This is the most dangerous verb. Abdication is to voluntarily give up something. When you withdraw from the Gulf, you create a value and give the way to Iran's domination, while as you should take consideration the strategic interests of your allies. And also is the foreign policy decision to retreat back in the fortress of America after World War I. All this that was created by US in the Second World War, being leader of the free world and the major power and the institutions that created and the commitment to democracy, human rights. Now Trump deal only with authoritarian regimes. And now we find that the US foreign policy has become theatrical, informed, backward, and bullying. Reckless are the qualities that American president brings to the table. When he's quoting the book, as you see from the screen on the everybody see that the USA is interested ally. The world had to observe the spectacle of American unmaking the world it made. So USA is destroying the world that it had created, and the consequences will remain with us for years to come. This is a warning signal for all the allies of USA and even the rivals of USA that you should not count and trust USA, develop your own capability, business. Well, Trump is only a phenomenon that will go away, but all this is a continuation of Obama and of the next administration, the hands-off approach, burden sharing. You should play your own role. That's why the solution of the crisis of the Gulf is a must. Self-destruction must come to an end. I said this in Washington, in Kuwait, and in Qatar, and I repeat it here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah AlShayji.
الدكتور محمد المنشاوي يتكلم عن مخاطر شخصنة العلاقات السعودية الأمريكية.
Now our third speaker, Mr. Mohamed Elmenshawy. He is a journalist and a writer. I remember him a few months ago. He had a very good presentation. Thank you. Too important. I have 2 masters, but I'm not a PhD holder. People normally like to be called doctors. Secondly, the risk of personalizing US-Saudi relations was a paper was prepared and presented to the center before the Khashoggi affair started, so it's left me rather in a difficult situation now to link what I'm going to say to the paper. The other point I'd like to make is what Dr. Abdullah AlShayji spoke about, the relationship or the alliance between senior partner and junior partner, and Glenn Snyder spoke about that. And at times of crisis, of course, there'll be a lot of tension in any kind of relationship. But the most important test was evident in the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait and the Gulf crisis. Now all these theories have become more apparent when 100 hundreds of thousands of American soldiers were sent to the Gulf in defense of Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia realizes its importance, whether to do with oil flow or the symbolism of its being the country where the holy shrines of Islam are housed. So in this sense, at least, there is some sort of a balanced understanding by the Saudis that their alliance with the U.S. is based on this relationship. About the alliance itself, the first point is the historical one, and we all know about how it happened, how it developed. Secondly, the Trump dimension, and thirdly, the Khashoggi affair and how it will impact the U.S.-Saudi relations. 2018 saw the 75th anniversary of the establishment of the relations between the United States and Saudi Arabia. In 1943, Eisenhower invited King Saud Abdulaziz, who did not attend personally, but two of his sons, Princes Faisal and Khalid, who later both became kings and ruled their countries. In 1943, it was the first time when a member of the Saudi royal household traveled to the United States. They went by sea to Florida, then they flew to Washington and were hosted in the official residence, and they knew America well. They met most of the power centers. They traveled to 10 states. The visit was very well organized, and one of the most important features of this long trip was the main oil companies, whether in Texas or California, and one of the photographs here shows that they visited one of these oil installations, and the reason was to introduce them to American military power. They visited many bases, military bases, the Naval Academy in Minneapolis, and they met U.S. defense officials. And there was no, I think, CIA at that time, otherwise they would have met them. So the first phase of the establishment of the relations was very simple. Protection in return for oil, and I think there is no written documentation, but there is a lot of talk about the Saudi king meeting with Eisenhower. We cannot hear speakers without, I'm sorry, I'm corrected. I meant Roosevelt and King Abdulaziz, not Abdullah. Thank you, my apologies. But the equation was simple: protection in return for oil. 13 American presidents preceded President Trump, and 6 Saudi kings came before Salman, Roosevelt, Truman, Kennedy, Johnson, Carter, Clinton, Obama, from the Democrats, from Republicans, Eisenhower, Nixon, Ford, Reagan, Bush Sr. and Bush Jr., and from Saudi Arabia, Abdulaziz, Saud, Faisal, Khalid, Fahd, Abdullah. And the Americans used to deal with the king who was on the throne. They didn't concern themselves with the internal conflicts of the Saudi royal household. When there was a problem or a power struggle between Saud and Faisal in 1957, they both visited Washington. They wanted to draw the White House, each tried to draw the White House to their side, but the United States elected to take a neutral stand. They didn't want to take any sides, and the relationship has never changed with the death of a king or the departure of a president or a new president coming to power. In the first phase of the establishment, there was not a linear path. There were crises, sometimes of existential nature, sometimes as a result of direct behavior from Washington or Riyadh, and the cost was very heavy in dealing with these crises. Sometimes it was not the result of a direct action by the US or Saudi, but a reaction to an event. And the oil crisis of 1975 was a very serious one. Many leading newspapers in the United States called for the invasion of Saudi Arabia at that time. You remember what happened in the 1973 Yom Kippur War, and at that time the oil price went up fivefold. Imagine if the oil price goes up 5 times, what kind of an economic crisis that would produce. This shook the relations between the countries. The second structural crisis was the 9/11 event, when about 15 or 17 of the terrorists were of Saudi nationality. And the Saudis did not expect the United States would give up on them despite all these crises. But also another crisis was the Justa Act, which is Justice Against the Supporters of Terrorism Act. And unlike what was known in the Congress, I think 92% of the votes supported this act, and despite all the PR work and all the money the Saudis spent to counter this, the act went ahead, and this allows, of course, U.S. citizens who are victims of terrorism to sue the Saudi royal family members of the Saudi state. And of course, this will have a major impact, and especially when there are some sort of a feeling or a general feeling that the Saudi consulate in Washington had some sort of an indirect support of the terrorists. When Israel was established, King Abdulaziz was against that, and he expressed his views to the Americans, but Saudi remained an important ally. In the days of the Shah also was an important ally. The U.S. presidents used to visit Tehran, even when they didn't visit Riyadh. But Washington, in the end, kept its allies in the dark, similarly to what happened to the nuclear deal. And also there were other crises like the invasion of Afghanistan. There is also the storming of the holy shrine in Mecca by Saudi extremists. in Saudi Arabia, there is no such thing as political establishment, similarly to what's known in the United States, but sometimes in fact, in Saudi regime, there were two central figures who played a central role in the relations with the United States. Despite the kings coming and going, these two important personalities are Prince Bandar bin Sultan and Prince Turki Al Faisal. The first was ambassador for 22 years, and the second was in charge of the Saudi intelligence apparatus for 22 years also, and there were relations at different levels, on bilateral, economic, political, intelligence, military, and never when a king died in Riyadh or a president departed in Washington had any impact on the strategic relations between the countries. The first phase saw a strange thing, and which is the second phase, in fact, which is what happened between the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Naif and the Deputy Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and after President Trump came to power. I think this, in my opinion, is the second phase of the relationship, when Khalid bin Salman was appointed ambassador. He was both ambassador representing his country and representing his own brother, the deputy crown prince. And Khalid bin Salman was viewed as representing his own brother, not the regime. And the funny thing is, Mohammed bin Naif, as Minister of the Interior and Crown Prince, signed a contract with a lobbying company, and all these contracts are available at the Ministry of Justice or Department of Justice. And this contract was signed by the second man in charge after Mohammed bin Naif in the Ministry of the Interior. And this happened 5 months after President Trump came to power. And in addition to the lobby acting on behalf of the Ministry of the Interior, there was another lobby acting on behalf of Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, the Deputy Crown Prince, which was established by one of Mohammed bin Salman's friends, and another one called Spark, with a name similar to AIPAC. But this competition between the two men did not last for long. But the fact that parties within the Saudi royal household, the Crown Prince and Deputy Crown Prince, competing in this way, and both and each one trying to gain Washington's support. Personalizing the relations after President Trump came to power, Bob Woodward described that in his book, and even during the presidential campaign there was animosity towards Hillary Clinton. I think they saw that as an opportunity to present a new face of Saudi Arabia. And when Mohammed bin Salman visited President Trump 3 months after he came to power, the Saudi media presented this as an important historic development. And also, this kind of personalizing relations between the countries manifested itself in certain events, like the visit by President Trump to Riyadh at a time when not many other countries, even in Western countries, were prepared to receive him. So the Saudis took the opportunity, and Trump took the opportunity, and the personalizing of relations became apparent that in the crisis with Qatar, when it started at the beginning, President Trump appeared to be taking the side of Saudis, and also President Trump really made tweeted sometimes, twice at least, on Mohammed bin Salman's step when he arrested people at the Ritz-Carlton, when no other world leader did the same. And of course, the Saudis tried to use this occasion to show their favor of President Trump and dislike of President Obama, and at the same time try to rally support for their position regarding Iran. Even this came at a time when the president was signing presidential executive orders banning Muslims from entering the country. Some figures in the U.S. presidency and administration spoke about that when American officials used to go to Riyadh, but only to meet their counterparts. Like the head of intelligence would meet his counterparts, ministers and secretaries, and so on and so forth. But they started noticing that everybody who went to Riyadh had to meet Mohammed bin Salman in person, and this kind of personalization. Your time is over. The third phase is what I didn't include in the paper, that was the killing of Khashoggi, which will happen.
Thank you, Mr. Dr. Mohammed. It's Mr. Mohammed. He doesn't like to be called doctor because he has the PhD. But if you in Washington don't like to be called doctor, come here to the Gulf and give you so many titles. We have so many such titles. I know you have many questions, but first of all, I'd like to use my authority as a moderator to address a question to Mr. Cordesman. Dr. Cordesman, أول مرة اجتمعت في 1970 في واشنطن، وأنت هناك منذ 1959 لحد الآن. عشت بعد 12 رئيس وباختصار كيف ترى ورأيك في العلاقة لأكثر من 60 سنة؟ ليس وقت توني، وقتي أنا باختصار.
Let me put it very quickly. What is striking is the continuity in the defense budget, in the level of forces, the level of consistency in terms of actual operational coordination with the U.S. and Arab commands. What I would say to all of you is try reading our defense budget and our defense strategy sometimes rather than these sort of political diatribes. It isn't necessarily wrong to be a political scientist. I guess I have to admit I am one. It is certainly not necessarily right.
Thank you. What do you mean it's not right to be a political scientist?
You want cut our
means of survival. What shall I do, Abdullah, Hassan, or I will never accept it.
Now we begin the questions and answers. Please, I'm asking you all, please, to have precise questions to say to whom it is addressed without commentaries, and please introduce yourselves. We usually take from the right questions from the right and then left. Being from one of the older generation who lived in the atmosphere of leftist and nationalism, I would like to begin with the left. I give you first, sir. And you are not a leftist now, not like me. Dr. Hamd Abdullah, Kuwait University. Question to Dr. Mohamed Elmenshawy. What are the aspects of this third stage on the Saudi-American relations, especially of what happened to Khashoggi and the Saudi consulate in Turkey? Dr. Zafar Ajmi.
My question is to Mr. Cordesman. We have a Gulf crisis between Qatar and the four countries, but we do have military cooperation. We have the GCC Military Joint Command, we have the C-Cube-I, we have the Unified Strategy, we have ammunition standardization, we have 120 exercise, and I don't know, you're not allowed to go to military camps. I spent the last 30 years of my life in military camps among all the GCC countries. I think you are undermining the GCC military cooperation, and I think you are marketing for the CENTCOM instead of that. Thank you, sir.
My name is Nuruddin Al-Amin. I am a Sudanese American. Expert translator at the Advisory Council in Qatar. As a researcher, Mr. Antony, do you think from your life experience that Iran is a real enemy of America? And is the area of the Middle East still important for America? Thank you.
يا سؤال يسار. شكرا تفضل. شكرا دكتور. عرف نفسك رجاء.
Dr. Hamoud from Oman Sultanate. Question to Dr. AlShayji. You spoke about American policies and how it is changing especially in the Gulf, but we know that the world only looks after all the countries want their own interests and benefits. So USA now is calculating their interests and finds that the billions of dollars that is spent in the Iraq war and the Syrian war, and consequently, I think they are reviewing their relations with the Gulf, and also, especially now, they have abundance in petroleum production and gas production in USA. So, in your opinion, do you think it's easy? Can the USA easily abandon the son they have brought up in the Middle East, which is Israel, without having relations with the GCC countries, because these countries might have a role that is important for USA. Is that true or no? I'm very happy that Abdullah is here. The best expression I heard today is that the Gulf is in a self-destruction situation. This is quite true. So the question is, there is lack of trust between the USA and the Gulf, despite the long relations. What is the alternative? You always speak about the new security framework in the Gulf. In light of this crisis between the two countries, is this possible? Or is something that's part of the past? Dr. Mohamed Elmenshawy. Very important question that you said that the relations between the US and Saudi are 70 years old. If Mohammed bin Salman claims a liability on this relationship, why should the USA change him? They can bring the smallest, the youngest prince in the family and make him crown prince. What is more important? Who's decided this relationship with Saudi? Is the American establishment or the Trump himself? Thank you. U.S. lost trillions of dollars in Iraq, Afghanistan. Yes. Latest paper in Brown University, there was a discussion about the money they lost there. The latest figure says 6 trillion. Trump says 7 trillion and said we got nothing, neither the petrol of Iraq nor anything else. And they killed 500,000 Muslims. This is a conservative estimate that 500,000 Muslims were killed on the hands of the American forces, and this was published in Newsweek. Can USA abandon Israel? I don't quite understand the question. What do you mean? What's the relationship between USA have their own strategy to reduce their military presence or to push the Gulf State to do sort of burden sharing as began by Obama, and now must pay to USA. But the important point, nobody thinks at all that the USA will completely withdraw from the region, because that will be even against the national security of USA, because USA also wants to control the sources and the routes of energy to India and China, but they should participate with this under the control of USA. There will be no complete withdrawal, but there will be decreasing the presence at the condition of acting together with other countries, which we're not doing, unfortunately. Now I go to the question to my colleague, Dr. Khalil. Yeah, it is true we are at stage of self-destruct. If you want to weaken Iran and not allow Turkey or the new Ottomans nor the Persians to come into our region, the first thing we should do as important big countries, especially Saudi Arabia, you should bring in the other GCC countries together, which the GCC, which were created for defensive purposes after the Iranian Revolution and the chaos in the region. So there was this need to have an added value. When going to alliances, we should know what is the added value. What is the added value of such an alliance? Nothing. This was complete failure. I gave it an F. As a professor in the university, I gave F to the GCC countries and their security and defense cooperation. We do not trust the future of GCC. So self-destruct continues. As alternative, we don't have a good alternative unless we begin to think about a regional architecture, and that in the future would be Iran different than what it is now, and Iraq should be different from. But we must begin with the inside the Gulf. Which is broken. So how can we speak about security architecture of the region if we don't even have a unified GCC? Let's solve the Gulf crisis, reassure Qatar, and we have the biggest American land base in Abidjan, Kuwait. So why should they go to Turkey? Why should Bahrain ask help from Britain? All this is not reassuring and means that we need to think more collectively, otherwise we stay under threat. So the alternative is difficult, and in fact there is no other but than the United States. It's the only player in the region who has a projection of power. China cannot reach here. It can have bases in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, but they will not have this power to be an active player, no other Russia. It's only, so you should only count on yourselves and and organize your own inside house in the Gulf. And then we should also keep in mind what's happening in Iran and Iraq. These are the strongest regional countries, Iraq and Iran.
When is your turn? Try to be as brief as possible.
Well, let me just very briefly return to a technical term used earlier, which was the word bullshit. $7 trillion is more than the entire United States defense budget during a period of 10 years. So it's nonsense. And there is absolutely no justification for 500,000 casualties. That borders on being insultingly stupid. Let me say about the Gulf Cooperation Council, I think I have visited. It does some things well. It does not do what it should do well. Is it forced to preside over the waste of vast amounts of money for pointless prestige bars? Yes. Does it develop the mission priorities it needs? No. In terms of U.S. interests in the Gulf, let me note that here we have an interest we didn't discuss earlier, and that is a critical one, which is the stability of the global economy. We are now, in percentage terms, more dependent in our GDP on the stable flow of exports from Asian countries dependent on Gulf oil than we ever were on the import of oil. In terms of Iran as the real enemy, let me caution you. I don't know exactly what will appear in the course of the Trump administration early next year. They're supposed to have a strategy out. But let me say that the current emphasis within the National Security Council is on war fighting with Iran and not with deterring it. And I find that a little more frightening than I do the other. The other caution I would give you is terrorism. And here, let me close by mentioning the START database. We have not defeated ISIS. We're not going to defeat ISIS. According to START, it was only responsible for less than 40% of the terrorist incidents in its area of operation over the last few years, and this is a critical priority for the United States.
The third stage within relationship between Saudi Arabia and Washington depends on how will this crisis be put to an end, and Washington plays an important factor in that. I follow the American media and the American political discourse, and I have followed the 9/11 events. I was there at the time. Saudi Arabia now is being criticized more than it was criticized during the 9/11 crisis. At that time, they knew that the royal family were victims. These 19 Saudis were used to attack the relations with Saudi. Whereas today, now the USA consider Saudi Arabia as a rock state and Mohamed bin Salman as a rock leader, but they distinguish between, everybody says the relationship is very important for the interests of USA, but this not necessarily be through as Mohammed Salman. Sacrificing Mohammed Salman does not mean an end to the strategic strategy between Washington and Riyadh. And I think the American institutions, and to respond to the Khalid's question, are threatening Mohammed bin Salman and also Mohammed bin Zayed. A friend of mine in CIA said once that the American law allows different countries to have lobbies to serve to attack other countries. The American laws allow that, but, and I'm quoting what he said, that he said it's a different story, that there are small countries, referring to the GCC countries, that are playing with the American policies. That's why they were giving direct, indirect support, as the investigations showing now about the elections in USA, that there were Emirates intervention in the American elections, and even Asiri, General Asiri had met my advisor of Mr. Trump before coming to being elected. So I think a sort of revenge between the American institutions and the rulers of the Emirates and Saudi Arabia. And you can see this in the leaks they are making. The CIA had made these leaks that it was, and before Mr. Trump's statement that the CIA had leaked its report condemning Mohammed bin Salman, and all those who saw the report in the Senate confirmed this. The Secretaries of Defense and the state did not confirm this. I think the relationship is according to the development of the crisis, which is still continuing and will not continue soon. So the institutions will prevail at the end. And another thing, Washington is somebody said that there is leaving a vacuum in the Gulf. No, that's not true. I think, and those who in Washington see that the American control of different parts of the world, including the Gulf, is stronger than any period in history. They knew that the people here speak English more than Arabic. As I'm quoting the Americans, that as long as software and the apps used in all over the world, including the Gulf, are Facebook and Twitter, USA's sun will always shine in the region, and this affects all people in the world. We must keep in mind that there are new ways of controlling other countries. For them, it's a very big victory that the elite in the Gulf states speak English. I'm sorry, our time is over. We got a bit late, and there are so many questions you still have. So I will give you 5 minutes only. Then I'll give each panelist some few minutes also. My question is to Dr. AlShayji. We have noticed that after the Second World War, the countries that went into direct wars and were part of the Cold War directly, and who are also threatened by nuclear powers such as Korea, South Korea, Japan, and West Europe. All these countries were threatened, although they were allies of USA. Nevertheless, after their alliance with USA, they were no longer threatened as much as we are threatened nowadays in the GCC Gulf Strait. Is our fear from Iran, maybe this question is also to the Cordesman also, beginning from the United Arab Emirates, the Expo 2020 project they had, after that World Cup 2022, and then after that the NEOM project in Saudi Arabia, and then after that the 2035 project in Kuwait. All these economic promising projects need or require a security and political environment. So if the GCC countries are not feeling this safe environment to launch and such project, can they continue it? Mr. Cordesman, another question. Dr. Hussein, you compare the Iranian armament as Photoshop, in fact, and what they showed is only Photoshop. But if these weapons of Iran, so why not the GCC countries are spending, after the liberation of Kuwait, why have they spent $2 trillion although all the wars of the USA were lost. They lost the Vietnam War, the Afghanistan War, the Iraq War. So why should we count on the USA to save us from the toys? Jamal Hawari, journalist in Qatar. First of all, I'd like to comment on these interventions with the Arab region and the Gulf states. Although the United States gives us lessons, especially the Republicans, I will be very happy when the Republicans win, although I'm a liberal person, because the Republicans are very frank, very clear, and very impertinent. For example, the last crisis reminds us of Iran-Contra. The same scenario almost. USA was on the side of Iraq then, exported weapons to Iran, and violated 2 American laws. The question to Dr. AlShayji, what is the alternative of asking for U.S. protection for the GCC countries, especially Russia and China are taking such a bad position? About the trust crisis, I think USA very much trusts the GCC countries, especially the Emirates. The Emirates, United Arab Emirates, are doing all the dirty work for USA, not only in the Gulf, but in all Arab countries. By the nature of my work, I used to work in I used to attend the secret meetings of Mohammed bin Zayed, so I know what's going. So I can tell you that all that is being done is done by the United Arab Emirates.
My comment to Mr. Cordesman. About the killing of Khashoggi, do you quote with me that the conduct of President Trump and not the United States of America is a misconduct, can summarized in procrastination, connive, collusion. Me as a Middle Eastern don't care who's controlling the White House, the Senate or the House, because the foreign policy either for Democrats, for the red or for the blue are the same. Totally biased to Israel and full guarantee for its security. The second, supporting and boasting totalitarian regimes in our area. The third, and this is the more important, the satanic swap between arms, destroying our countries, and jobs in their countries. Do you approve with me or you agree? Thank you very much.
I have two questions. One to Dr. Sadiq Abdullah. I think you were too tough when speaking about Obama. Obama is the only American president who visited Saudi Arabia 3 times and created sort of strategic alliance between the GCC and USA. But he had a different vision about the nuclear program of Iran. And I think GCC countries could have went into a dialogue with him in a better way. My question, second question, is to Mr. Cordesman.
You ask actually for the GCC country to raise funding for defense budget and all of that. But what they to do with all of that if they have F-35 and they don't have pilots? The training of the pilots is cost more than the airplane itself. It should be actually other ways to solve the conflict within the region rather than actually just going into armed race, which has unlimited resources.
شكرا. تفضل دكتور عبد الله. في دقيقة ونص. أنا عندي 3 أسئلة.
I have 3 questions. Microphone, please, Rajan. Why the countries who are supported by Iran are not witnessing any stability? These countries are in their own region are stable. you need to have what is called low-intensity violence, which is there should always be some tensions and some limited wars, such as the Iraqi-Iran war, and that should be not this is the first bill. And then don't have a balance of power, regional one, as was said by Dr. Ross. We don't have regional balance of power. We have imbalance of power, and pushes the others to interfere in your affairs, and pushes Iran, which wants to be a country that is a vicious country. I said, if I were in their place, I would exploit this security vacuum. And this is what Ahmadinejad said when Saddam Hussein was toppled in Iraq 2003. He said, we will fill the vacuum, and they are doing so, and do not have any project to stop them. That way you don't have stability, and you have the USA and the West want to maintain the status quo, and you cannot have any powers. As for the alternative, there is no alternative. The alternative is not to count on others, to count on your own selves, to not, and so have some sort of regional balance. And if you have a common project to Iran and Iraq in the future, but you must first begin with inside, with your own home. In fact, I wasn't tough with Obama. In fact, I praised him. I said that he did do good things, such as strategic dialogue, and he also the Us Gcc annual. But at the end, he did not reassure the GCC countries regarding Iran, while he calls himself cautious realist, while he's more idealist than cautious realist.
I think under those circumstances, I will just pass the microphone on.
The question to me was about, is there an alternative to USA? We don't think so that there's any time there will be an alternative to USA with Russia or China, because we'd have a look at the American economy, the Ministry of Defense or the Department of Defense, and the quality of the American weaponry are the biggest complex. Of course, China is bigger in number, but the quality of weapons of USA is far superior. And there's also the soft power and how this changes the world. I said that now everybody has a open heart surgery here will go to USA, not to Russia or to. So USA is staying with us. We'd like it for at least 2 more decades. Thank you. Before we put into this session, there are 2 announcements. There is a lunch invitation. Downstairs, there's a restaurant, and another invitation after lunch. The intellectual lunch after this there is an exhibition downstairs before you go to lunch. Thank you. I thank you. Thank very much all the panelists, the AlShayji, the Cordesman, and thanks for the center. I'm sorry that we have some of them. Thank you. Thank you.